Alright, so we're on part 3, personality, chapter 15, AP Psychology, 8th edition, David Myers textbook. So now we're going to look at the trait perspective. And the trait perspective is just looking at your traits and seeing these dispositions and how durable they are and a consistent way of behaving over time. And this makes up your personality. So traits would be like honest, dependable, moody, impulsive. So Alport, he looks at this stuff and he identifies 18,000 words to represent your traits. Now, the Myers-Briggs test, please know it, because it's going to be on the AP exam without a doubt. The Myers-Briggs test is just a personality test, and all it does is it measures your traits, and it tries to figure out what type of personality you are. So a feeling type of person would be sympathetic, appreciative, and tactful. This is what the Myers-Briggs test does. Now, Cattell, he looks at those 18,000 and he says that's way too many words, so he tries to break it down into 16 personality factors. And how he does it is he uses factor analysis, and he uses a statistical approach to actually describing a person's personality and how it relates to them. So here's what Cattell does. So he looks at somebody's like basic trait of excitement, and here's some words that would actually describe the person. So 16 core personality traits, and it's based on all statistical correlations. Now, personality dimensions by Elsnick, what this guy did, what they decided to do was they looked at extroverted versus introverted, stable versus unstable people. So an extrovert is someone outgoing, loud, talkative. Okay, an introvert would be like a wallflower, somebody who is real shy, inhibited. Now, emotionally stable person is somebody who is pretty stable. You get this consistent pattern. An unstable person is someone who's all over the place. So in this one, it's pretty easy to do when you look at extrovert versus introvert, emotionally stable versus emotionally unstable. Okay? Now, how you actually assess traits is through these things called personality inventories, and these are questionnaires. Normally they're true or false. Are they agree, disagree with it? This is mostly describes me. This is all the time describes me. And so what you do is you look at that and you look at data and you just figure out what a person's personality is. So it's a questionnaire in order to figure out somebody's traits. So the Myers-Briggs, it's a personality inventory, and it really does help people figure out what a personality is. Now the MMPI is another test that you need to know. And this is widely researched, it's clinically used, and it tries to identify emotional disorders. So when you look at emotional disorders, here's some of the stuff that it kind of will look at. It looks at like hypochondrialis. Hypochondrialis is a somatoform disorder, and this means that there's nothing really wrong with the person. Like you run every medical test, but they still feel sick. So a hypochondriac is someone who they'll go to 10 doctors, and all doctors will say they don't have the flu, but they still think they have the flu. Depression, hysteria, all the stuff. This is what MMPI will actually diagnose. Now the big 5 factors. Here's another one that you guys need to know, and this is easy to remember if you remember Canoe. So conscientiousness, like we're looking at ends of spectrums here. Okay, so you get a check mark or you're on the other side of the spectrum. Okay, so organized, careful, disciplined. If you're conscientious, this is what you do. Now if you're not, then you're disorganized, careless, impulsive. Now, agreeableness is like soft-hearted, trusting, helpful. If not, you're ruthless, suspicious, uncooperative. Neuroticism is just basically, are you emotionally stable or are you an unstable person? So are you calm, secure, self-satisfied, or are you the anxious, insecure, self-pitying type? That would be the unstable type. Now, openness, you're imaginative, you have a preference for variety, like to spice it up, and you're independent. Now, if not, then you're closed-minded. So you're practical, preference for routine, and you're conforming. An extrovert is someone who's sociable, fun-loving, and affectionate. Now, the other side, the introvert, retiring, sober, reserved. And this is a pretty easy personality theory. Here's some questions about the big 5. How stable are these traits? Pretty stable in adulthood. They can change, though, over development. How heritable are they? Hey, you're 50% of your mom and your dad, whether you like it or not, so 50% for the traits. So how about other cultures? These traits are pretty common across cultures. Can they predict other personal attributes? Yes, conscientious people are morning type, and extroverts tend to be the evening type, partygoers. Now, the present situation controversy. So Michel, he points out that traits can be enduring, but it can be different based on your situation. So he says traits are not a good predictor of your behavior. So you might be real conscientious at school, and then your room is an absolute wreck that your parents have deemed a disaster zone. Now, the person situation controversy. Trait theorists argue that behaviors from a situation may be different. So, like your room at home, absolute mess. You're perfect in your classroom. So, traits matter because pretty much if you look at average behavior, it kind of remains the same. Now, the other stuff is that we look at is traits are socially significant and they influence our health, our thinking, and our performance. And this is Gosling who come up with this. Consistency of expressive style. Expressive styles and speaking gestures demonstrate their trait consistency. So when you look at someone who's actually trained to observe people, they can actually get somebody's behavior and feelings in as little as 30 seconds. So normally what it means is that we do judge people within the first minute of meeting them. We get their expression, we get their type of personality based on how they express themselves. So, you know, that's how it goes. Now we're going to move into the next one, social cognitive perspective. Social cognitive perspective is Bender. You guys remember him from learning, and Bender is the guy who did the Bobo doll experiment. So in Bender, he believes that personality is a result of your interaction between the person and your society, your social context. Okay, so when you look at the reciprocal influences, what he's talking about here is he's looking at reciprocal determinism. So your environment and your personality intersect. So 3 factors: behavior, cognition, and environment. And so they all work together to form you. So the internal cognitive factors here. The person who has the risky behavior, they think about risky behaviors, they think it's fun. And then you have environmental factors. If you've got people who are your friends and they're bungee jumpers, you think risky, you got friends, the environment, and now your behavior is probably going to be you're going to go ahead and jump off that perfectly good bridge to see if you can be a human rubber band. That's reciprocal determinism, guys. Your behavior, your cognition, and your environment, they all form you. So he looks at your thinking, he looks at the environment, and he looks at how it all affects your behavior. Now, individuals and environments, there's specific ways in which individuals and environments interact. Different people choose different environments. You listen to different music, you attend different schools, and it can be based on your disposition. Our personalities shape how we react to events. People who are real nervous, they have a lot of anxiety, they tend to react to things different than calm people. People who are calm, they're pretty much calm in every situation. So emergency, like emergency, it wouldn't freak a calm person out, but an anxious person, you might as well go ahead and knock them out. It'd be even that better. Our personality shapes situations. So how we view and treat people influences how they treat us. Sounds like that golden rule your parents gave you. So when we look at behavior, it emerges from an interplay of external and internal influences. So remember, biological, psychological, and social cultural. This is how you should look at everything in psychology. So here's how you form your personality. When we look at personal control, social cognitive psychologists, they emphasize our sense of personal control, whether we control the environment or the environment actually controls us. So if you have an external locus of control, it means that you are a passenger in the car that is your life. So you believe that some outside force controls your life. Now, if you're an internal locus of control, that means that you are the driver in the car that is your life. So you control your own fate. Now, Slingelman does a study called Learned Helplessness. Now, what he does, and I know you guys think it's cruel, he takes dogs and he ties them down to an electrical grid. And he ties them down to the electrical grid and he shocks them. And he does it over time, and he keeps doing it. Okay, then he unties the dog. There's an area where the dog can jump to. It's a little wall. And the dog can jump there, but he puts the dog on the electrical grid, shocks the dog. Do you know what the dog does? He stays on the grid, even though safety is right there, just a little inch to the left, and he refuses to jump there. Now, Slingelman does this to another dog, a dog that he's never tied down, never actually electrocuted. He takes another dog, puts the dog on the electrical grid, never tied her down. Remember, the safety wall is about an inch to the left, and he shocks the dog. That dog jumps to the safety wall. What this shows us is that sometimes we learn to be helpless. So when you are unable to avoid repeated adverse events, we can learn to be helpless. So there's an uncontrollable bad event. You have a perceived lack of control, and this is that generalized helpless behavior. This is the abuse victim cycle, guys. They don't feel like they can ever get out of the situation, and that's that learned helplessness. Optimism versus pessimism. Optimism is someone who kind of looks at the positive side of things, and when we look at positive psychology, it tries to actually improve individuals and help individuals thrive in their life. We know that optimistic people tend to live longer than the pessimistic people. Now, pessimism is when you're kind of in a negative way of explaining every event. Now, assessing behavior in situations. Social cognitive psychologists observe people in realistic and simulated situations. So they do the real stuff, the real world, and then they actually do the lab kind of setting. And they try and figure out which is the best way to predict somebody's behavior. There are critics to it. There's critics to everything in psychology. Critics say that social cognitive psychologists pay a lot of attention to the situation and pay less attention to the individual, his unconscious mind, his emotions, and his genetics. So they're saying maybe there's some free will there. Maybe the unconscious mind is taking effect. Maybe emotions. And hey, maybe that good old nature, the genetics part. Now, positive psychologists and humanist psychologists, positive psychologists, like the humanists, they try and look at humans being the best that they can be. And so positive psychology looks at positive subjective well-being, positive character, and positive social groups. So exploring the self, when we look at exploring ourselves, research focuses on different selves we possess. We dream, and others we dread. So, you know, sometimes we have good dreams, sometimes we dread things. Research studies have shown that we overestimate our concern that others evaluate our appearance, performance, and belongings. Remember, the spotlight effect is like you get in the cafeteria, all eyes are on you. Nobody's looking at you, you just think they are. Now, research studies the self-reference effect in recall too. I was doing this. That's the self-reference effect. Benefits of the self-esteem. Maslow and Rogers argued that a successful life results from a healthy self-image. So how you see yourself and how you actually are. That's that whole self-esteem. The following are 2 reasons why low self-esteem results in personal problems. When self-esteem is deflated, we view ourselves and others critically. If you have low self-esteem, you hate everybody else. So normally the bullies actually have pretty low self-esteem. Low self-esteem reflects reality, our failure in meeting challenges, our surmounting difficulties. So sometimes low self-esteem is because you had failures, and so you just start thinking you're a failure, which is not the case, but this is what happens. So culture and self-esteem, we look at individualism and collectivism. Remember, an individualist is someone who's out for themselves, and that's the American culture. That's pretty much the Western culture. And collectivist cultures are typically like Asian and African cultures, where it's the group that comes up with you. Self-serving bias, we are pretty careful of ourselves. So there's a defensive self-esteem. It's pretty fragile. And whenever our self-esteem is in question, we normally kind of block people from actually hurting us. So we accept more responsibility for good deeds and less for bad deeds. I did that perfect project on my own. You didn't do any of it, but you're more willing to accept it because it was a good project. Now, if a teacher asks, who did this god-awful poster, and then, you know, nobody wants to claim it. So that's the end of Chapter 15, AP Psychology, 8th edition, David Meyer's book. I'm sorry it took 3 parts, but hey, there's a lot of material to cover.